The black, lucent Glide electric car glided along the cobblestone road, leaving behind the faint afternoon mist and the long shadow of a middle-aged woman. The driver stepped out to open the door, but she had already done so herself. No rush, no hesitation. Elara Nyx, 41, CEO of Nyx Tech Capital, one of the world's fastest-growing technology and renewable energy investment firms, needed no greeting. Her biological clock ran as precisely as the neural networks her company built. The gates of the Stonebrook estate opened automatically. No facial recognition is needed, just the license plate. Yet Elara paused for a moment, not out of hesitation, but to observe. The ancient oak trees lining the gate had turned a deep golden hue, like burnished bronze. Amid this classical scene stood a grand house, a blend of neoclassical architecture and modern thermal control technology. Stonebrook was more than a mansion. It was the domain of the Varnet family, 3 generations of wealth built on monopolizing the industrial sapphire supply chain used in quantum chips and superconductive screens. Today, they hosted a soft networking evening, a traditional way for old money tycoons to maintain face while assigning contracts with those they weren't ready to consider equals. This contract was worth $512 million. Elara knew that, but she also knew something else. Some things are priceless. The ebony-carved wooden door opened silently. A silver-haired butler led Elara into the main hallway, warm yellow lights reflecting off the pale gray marble floor. No one came to greet her. No introductions were made. No one introduced her. In the nearly 20-meter-long dining room, 14 people sat around a rectangular table, with Thomas Varnet, the founding patriarch, at one end, and his eldest son, Sterling Varnet, at the other. His wife, Althea, sat silently on the left, her high collar concealing age spots on her neck. Amid the clinking of cutlery and crystal glasses, Elara entered. Her footsteps echoed clearly. Sterling looked up and smiled. "Ms. Nyx, it's a pleasure to have you with us. I thought the schedule of a tech leader would be as tight as the rearview mirror of a self-driving car." Elara nodded slightly, her voice as calm as still water. "I always prioritize dinners where I don't have to call for service." Her response caused 2 young women to glance at each other. One of them, perhaps a cousin, turned away to hide a smile. Sterling didn't back down. He merely smirked and raised his glass. "Well, I hope tonight's turbot is worthy of your valuable time. I came for the contract. As for turbot, I can order it at any restaurant in Singapore." For the next 27 minutes, no one asked her about Nyx Tech's strategic vision, the independent grid investments in Rwanda, or the decentralized data processing achievements that earned her accolades at the Davos conference. Instead, they discussed haute couture, vintage Burgundy wine collections, the potential expansion of sapphire mines in southern Ghana before journalists start paying attention to the local population. Elara ate slowly. She didn't utter a word, until Althea, with her white hair tightly pinned, looked at her and asked, very gently, "It's truly inspiring to see a woman like you in such a position. I'm sure the media needs symbols like that." She recognized that kind of statement. She had heard it from a university dean, from a law partner, from a friendly white journalist who requested an interview but wrote an article portraying her as lucky rather than competent. "A woman like you?" That phrase wasn't descriptive. It was defining. Elara set down her knife. She stood up. No one had time to react. "Thank you for the meal. I think I left something in the car." Sterling was surprised, but remained composed. "We still have dessert, Belgian chocolate mousse, like your achievements, sweet and unexpected." Elara strolled to the door. Indeed, except mousse melts quickly. If you've ever been in a room where everyone looks at you as a beautifully colored inconvenience, you might understand why Elara wasn't angry. She just walked out. And if you've ever wondered when the right time is to stand up, you might be very close to the answer. Perhaps right now, you should share your thoughts. Below the video, there's a blank space, just enough for people like Elara, those who were never invited to the table. Within 3 hours of Elara leaving the Stonebrook estate, the Varnet Group's legal advisory team received an email. The subject line was simple: change in negotiation plans. No, thank you. No explanation, no blame, no exclamation marks. But those who read the email, lawyers, investors, project coordinators, understood Elara Nyx had withdrawn. This news didn't leak to the public, but it spread like wildfire in sealed basements, through encrypted emails, investor signal groups, and midnight Zoom calls between Tokyo and Palo Alto. Because the deal with Nyx Tech wasn't just a contract, it was an implicit ethical certificate. Not everyone has time to investigate an entire ESG, environmental social governance, strategy in the venture capital industry. But if Nyx Tech Capital agrees to partner with you, you're clean enough to be trusted. And the opposite? If Nyx Tech quietly withdraws without warning, it means there's a problem. That afternoon, at Varnet's main office in Manhattan, Senior Advisor Andrew Cho presented an urgent report. He tapped lightly on the conference table. We didn't just lose a contract, we might lose the Southern Logistics chain. Sterling Varnet frowned. Because she threw a tantrum? Over a joke at dinner? Andrew looked Sterling straight in the eye. No smile, no deference, because she doesn't need to be angry. She just needs not to need us. Meanwhile, Elara was reviewing Nyx Tech's upcoming quarterly investment flows with her strategic advisory team in another office, without reinforced glass or large conference tables. They deleted 3 lines, added 5 new ones. Among them was an emerging sapphire mining company in Canada, founded by a group of indigenous female engineers, focusing on clean supply chains and local benefits. Not prominent, not covered by the media, but trusted. Elara didn't call the press. No press conferences, no articles sharing discrimination experiences. She didn't need to recount, because each of her actions was already an answer. Students began dissecting this situation at business schools as a live case study. There were no negotiation tricks, no hidden costs, no political backstage. Just one choice: sign the contract and stay silent, or refuse, and create an undercurrent. Late at night, Elara stood by the window in her small apartment in western Brooklyn, looking at the buildings shimmering with lights. A message came from her assistant. Revive Media requests an interview. They promise just one shoot. No lighting, no director, just you and them. Elara set down her phone. She didn't reply, but she took a sip of water and turned on her desk lamp. Revive Media, a female-founded media platform, sent an interview request weeks ago. They didn't expect a response, but on Monday morning an email from Nyx Tech arrived. Accepted, 1 camera, 1 interviewer, 45 minutes, no staging. No logo backdrop, no director's chair, no props. The shoot took place in the old basement of Nyx Tech's first building, where 5 years ago, Elara had set up a meeting table from a door removed from her mother's kitchen. The interviewer was Ria Tran, Revive's founder. She entered with a thin folder and asked just one opening question. If you hadn't walked out of that dinner, would things have been different? Elara looked straight into the camera. Number just slower. Silence. Ria waited. I didn't leave because I was offended. I left because I had no obligation to stay in a room designed to make me smaller. You know what's saddest? Not the words, but no one reacted. Rhea nodded, didn't interrupt. She turned a page. You once told a student, "Don't add more chairs. Set the table outside. Could you elaborate?" Elara smiled. I used to knock until my hands were sore. Thought if I tried a bit harder, I'd be invited in. But then I realized the door wasn't locked. It just wasn't meant for me from the start. So I stopped knocking. I went outside. I found a yard. I set up a table. And then others started to come. The video lasted 38 minutes. No background music, no editing. However, within 24 hours of posting, it surpassed 2 million views. The phrase, "We don't knock, we build," began appearing on shirts, book covers, presentation slides, and whiteboards during internal training sessions at dozens of companies. A short clip from the video where Elara says, "I don't need recognition to know I deserve it. I don't need an invitation to be present. I don't need courtesy when they lack dignity." Over 80 female CEOs shared it within a week. Not because it was shocking, but because it was too true to need embellishment. If you've ever stood in a room where you were the only one not allowed to speak, you might understand what Elara meant. It might be time to speak up if you're in a silent battle, unnoticed, unacknowledged. Not loudly, not at the right moment, just genuinely. Perhaps you want to leave a few lines somewhere as a reminder to yourself or someone like you. Below the video, there's a blank space. Not to persuade, just to show you're not alone. Tuesday morning, Nyx Tech's 12th floor office. 6 days had passed since the interview with Revive. Elara paid no attention to the shares. She didn't use personal social media. No Twitter account. Didn't like any posts. She had a habit of reading only raw reports, unfiltered, lengthy, without interpretation. That's how she controlled what she knew and what she ignored. Today, on her desk, was a special package. Not from a partner, no European stamps, but from a community college in Iowa. Inside was a handwritten proposal in slightly smudged purple ink. "We don't need you to give a speech, not asking for sponsorship. We just want to ask, if we want to rebuild a place where everyone can speak up, where should we start?" Signed, Nadia C., a second-year student in energy distribution systems. Elara read it once, then set it down. That afternoon, she canceled 2 meetings. No explanation was given. Instead, she opened her laptop, a device she rarely used, and typed the first line of her reply, "Don't build a building, build a courtyard, and leave space for those who arrive late." 3 months later, a new open space called the Courtyard came to life. No logo, no founding board. A repurposed factory cleaned up, with wooden tables arranged by students, technicians, night shift nurses, and single mothers learning to code after dark. No one checked resumes. No one asked, "Who's in charge?" People came because they'd heard, "Here, you can say something no one else would listen to elsewhere." Elara didn't appear at the opening. No one saw her photo. But the next morning, a robotics student snapped a picture. She was cleaning the ground floor window frame. Wearing a plain gray shirt. No badge, no speech. When someone approached to ask for a photo, she said, "I'm not here to inspire. I'm here to wipe the dust so others can see themselves more clearly." There was no news coverage of the courtyard, no clickbait headlines, but within 4 months, over 70 mini courtyards emerged across the country. In churches, abandoned schools, empty train stations, and even a broken-down bus converted into a scholarship application center. No corporations claimed them. No one tried to own them. One afternoon, at an open dialogue session in a courtyard, Nadia, the student who wrote the original letter, asked Elara, "Do you think you're starting a revolution?" Elara smiled, sipping lukewarm tea. If I were, I'd have called the press. Then what are you doing? Elara looked outside, where students were joining pallets to form new tables. Just reminding people who've been forced to nod their whole lives that not nodding is also an option. On Thursday, at one of the smallest courtyards, housed in a renovated warehouse on the outskirts of Minneapolis, Elara arrived early. The sun hadn't fully risen. The air carried the mixed scent of wood dust, coffee husks, and drying paint. She didn't come with a speech, didn't come to sign a grant. She simply showed up. A group of 6 people was taping handwritten questions to the wall, questions with no clear answers. How do I stop apologizing for being different? If I don't want to climb the ladder, can I walk sideways? Is it possible to reject a system without being erased from the map? Elara didn't answer. Instead, she sat on a rough wooden chair by the window. A brown-skinned student with foggy glasses approached her, carrying a sketch. I'm trying to redesign the scholarship system, not based on GPA, but on life journey. He babbled nervously like he wasn't sure he should share. Elara didn't ask questions. She nodded slightly. Not approval, but go on. She stayed for 2 hours, listened to 4 more people, didn't speak. In the end, Nadia came over and handed her a printed booklet, a guide written by 12 members from various courtyards around the country. The title was small and slanted. We were not invited, but we are here. Elara took it and sat on an old wooden chair. A soft light filtered through the slats. A young woman, barely 20, read a passage aloud, her voice shaky but clear. When you no longer pretend to sit properly just to be chosen, you can stand up and rebuild the whole table. No one recorded the video. No microphones, no hashtags. But somewhere else, in a small-town courtyard in Ohio, a 15-year-old girl, who had never dared to ask a question in class, read that line and wrote the first sentence in her journal. If Elara doesn't need to nod anymore, maybe I don't either. That wasn't viral. It was quite unlocking. And if you've come this far with this story, maybe you too have walked out of a room, not out of pride, but because you knew you had the right to. If you feel that truth, maybe you're already building a table somewhere, in your mind or a small community, finally learning how to listen. Maybe you don't need anyone to guide you anymore. Maybe now it's your turn to listen to someone else speak. And if you want this story to continue, not for me, not for the character, but for someone like you who's still silent out there, there's one small way. Maybe it's leaving a trace where you just read. A name, a story, a reply. It doesn't have to be polished, just honest. Or maybe it's something simpler. Following the places where stories like this are still being told, so that when someone else is lost, they'll see that the light is still on. Not because someone showed the way, but because we don't turn the light off just because we've made it.